This video is about data types, okay? Different types of data that you can use in your Python coding. So data types, let's type that into Google, data types Python, and see what that comes up with. So from this website you can see you've got a data type called string, and some ones that are numbers, integer, floats, complex, and so on. So I want to talk about strings, integers, floats, and a few others to get you started. So if we go to gcsecs.com, click on the first hit there, hover over Contact More, and then click on Code Editor. Okay, so I'll just delete these existing comments and bring the partition across. So I'm going to create a title, just call it data types, and I'm going to put the word CRIBS. Okay, so cribs. Cribs is going to remind us of a few different data types. So the first one is character. CHARACTER. Now a character actually is a bit of a cheat. It's just made up of a single string, okay? And sometimes one letter can denote a certain amount of information. So if you're doing a form and you need to write down that you're male, then you can just put an M and so on, okay? So a letter can denote things like a gender or other things, okay? So our first data type is just a single character. The next one I want to talk about is real float. Okay, essentially real and float mean the same thing. In Python coding, float is what it's called, but you might see the word real elsewhere, and they both mean the same thing, just to make it a bit more confusing. So a real number or a float number is very simple. It's a number with a decimal point, okay? Any number that has a decimal point is called a float, or any number with a decimal point is called a real, but in Python it's called a float. Real and float, same thing, a number with a decimal. The next one is integer. Well, this is quite simply a number that does not have a decimal point. A number without a decimal point is called an integer. The next one is Boolean. Boolean. I'm going to write the word true, and you'll see that the color changes. If I do it with a lowercase t, it doesn't care. If I write the word false with a capital L, capital F even, F-A-L-S-E, it changes color. If I write it with a lowercase F-A-L-S-E, it doesn't care. So Boolean is a data type where it's either true or false. Because some things in our universe are either true or false. When you flick on a light, switch on a light, it's either on or off, okay? You're either alive or dead, okay? Women are either pregnant or not pregnant. So some things in this universe are either true or false. And that true or false aspect, or that type of data, we call Boolean. And the last one is string. Now string is just alphanumeric, okay, so like A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. So information that has letters and numbers, in Python we call that a string. And that's it. Those are the 5 data types that I really wanted to do just to get your sort of understanding of that they exist and how they work differently. Well, clearly it's important to have these different ones because some things in life dictate a particular type of data type. So if you ever watch football or basketball or hockey or any of these, most games, when you have a scoring system, they use one of these particular data types. Do they use characters? Well, no. Do they use floats? Well, no, not in football. They use integers. Okay, so if you're ever having to make a game that has a score, so team A score, well, you're going to want the score to be an integer. And there it is. There's the function for integer. So what this means is you want it to store the data as an integer. So if I put an input, enter goals, right now I'm saying this line of code on line 9 is saying enter goals, but it has to be an integer. All right, please don't enter it as a Boolean or a float, because that won't make sense for the number of football goals. Okay, so I'm casting. The word here is casting for a particular data type, CAS, casting. And that's true for other things. So for example, if I want to buy a new TV and I'm interested in the price of the TV, well, prices of goods in shops tend to come in a particular data type, all right? And that is the float. And there is the function for the float. Inside that function, I'm just going to put an input, and I'm going to say enter price. Okay, so it's very rare that you'll go into a shop and you say, right, how much is that kebab? And he'll say £2. Actually, no, sometimes kebabs are £2. You go into an electronic shop and say, how much is that Nintendo Switch? And he'll say £150. No, it's always like £199, 99 pence. They always, take off 1p or one whatever currency you're working in to make it seem a bit cheaper. Okay, so pricing information is always floats. It's always in decimals. Pretty much everything is in decimals when it comes to price. And maybe if you're coding something and you want to know if a person has children or not, there you go. If you're saying, oh, I need you to fill in all these details and I need to find out, does that person have children? And you can use either true or false. Is that light switch on? Is that, have they chosen this? Whatever it is, if it's a this or that, the Boolean is really, really powerful for that. Address, or address information, or even name. So if you need to type in your name, well, guess what? You can specify that you want it to be a string, which means alphanumeric, which means letters and numbers. So I'm going to use the input. So I've got a function inside of a function, and then I'll put the string, enter name. Okay, and I'm going to switch it out with greater than, greater than, greater than. So you can kind of see how there are various data types, and they're really, really important. For example, if you work for eBay or Amazon or one of these big internet websites and you're looking after the pricing information, then you need to make sure you're using the correct data type, right? Do not use integers if you're dealing with prices. That won't make any sense. If you're dealing with ordering 5 products or 6 products, do not use floats. That won't make any sense. 6 or 7 products, when people buy stuff, that's an integer value. So you really need to cast for a particular data type. And that's it. So that's all I wanted to do is make you aware of the various data types. So if I run this code, what it's done is it knows about these variables and the fact that each variable holds a different type of data. But it's only down here where I'm casting for very specific types of data. So team score, enter a number of goals. Let me put 2 and then run that. And enter that, sorry. Let me enter the price of $1.99 and then enter that. And the name, J, and enter that. And that's it. So what I've done, and it's not going to display anything, but what it means is that I've now grabbed these particular data in exactly how I want it, because later on in my program, maybe I need to manipulate the types of data. And if I've captured them incorrectly, then I cannot manipulate them. So for example, if I enter goals as a string, Okay, so here's goals as a string, and I enter 2 goals. That's fine. It's captured 2 goals, but not as an integer, as a string. So the question is, can you do maths with strings? Well, let's have a look. Let's go with a variable called answer. And I want to take string and add it to, no, actually I'm going to take team score and add it to team score. Then I want to print answer. Play. Enter goals, 2 please. And it's displayed 22. Why? Because it's concatenated them, which is a word that means it's taken the 2 from here and it's squashed it together with another 2. 2 squashed together with a 2 is in the answer. That's clearly not maths. So that data type does not work if I'm wondering if I'm dealing with football goals. Well, clearly I need it to be integers. Okay, so let's try that again. Run that again. Enter goals, 2, press enter, 4. Good. Okay, because I did this 2 plus another 2 should equal 4, and then I displayed 4. So clearly you can see that it's really important to capture the data exactly. It's really, really important to capture data as a specific data type. If you capture the data as a wrong data type, then you may not be able to manipulate the data, just like I did there with the adding. Here's another example. So real float. Let me put a float here, which means I want the goals to be entered as a float. Well, let's change it from goals. Let's say enter price. Okay, so we're now dealing with price. So let me call the variable TV price. So we run the code. Enter price. Oh, the price of this TV is £399.99. And I enter that. And I haven't changed the variable. So TV price is going to go here, and it's going to go here. Let's try that again. So £399.99. There we go. So I've asked for the information to be input specifically as the data type float, so that I can manipulate and do what I want with floats. In this case, all I did was add them together. And whatever your programming does that takes you in the future, whatever you do with it, at least you know that you've captured the data as the correct data type that works best for you and your program in that instance. And that's it. That's the beauty of data types. So it's really key, or it's really important to cast for data types, just like you've seen here. You put the data type and then the input if you want an input, and then the string if you want a string. The maths and whatever you do with it is purely up to whatever it is that you're coding in that particular time. Okay, so have a go at this particular task. Okay, so here's the task. It says data types, casting for data types. See if you can create a variable that asks the user to input their first name. If you don't know what a variable is, then you need to see my video on variables. And the first name has to be a string, so you are casting as a string. Second line, in fact, I'll number these for you so we can make this a bit easier to read. Create a variable that asks the user to input their last name as a string. So another variable. Number 3, create a variable that asks the user to input their username as a string. Okay, so just their username as a string. Number 4, create a variable that asks the user to input their age as an integer. So you are casting specifically for an integer in this instance. Number 5, create a variable that asks the user to input their weight as a float. So you are casting specifically for a float. So like kilograms or whatever it is, maybe you weigh like 50.34 kilograms, who knows, all right? But you're just putting the number in, not the units, just the number. Number 6, display the string your first name is, and then the user's first name. Number 7, display the string your last name is, then the user's last name. Number 8, display the string your username is, then the user's username. Number 9, display the string your age is, and then whatever they inputted. Number 10, display the string your weight is, and then whatever they inputted. Yeah. So these lines, you're just displaying back whatever the user inputted in the first 5 inputs. Number 11, display the string, are these details correct? We're not going to do anything with it, but it just gets you the idea of why most programs ask you to input a bunch of stuff, display it back to you, and then ask you, is it correct? And then eventually, you can say, yes, it's correct, and then you move forward, or no, it's not correct, and then you do it all again. Add 3 or more comments that describe your code. If you don't know what a comment is, please watch my video on that, and make sure your code works. So that's the task. All you're doing is replicating so many different apps or websites where you enter your details. It says, are your details correct? And the fact is that they are asking you for those details to be data types that are very specific to each sort of thing. Name has to be a string, last name has to be a string, age works best as integers. Nobody ever says, oh, I'm 22.3 years old. No, it's always an integer. I'm 22 years old, or whatever your age is. And weights tend to be floats. Okay, so have a go at that. Please pause the video. Here comes the answer in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so here's how I've coded it. Remember, there's no exact right or wrong answer. I mean, it is possible to code things in slightly different ways, but as long as it works, that's the main thing. So, to introduce my code, I created this header from lots and lots of comments, an extra comment here, and a comment here that just describes these lines of code, which is to collect the data. Then I've got a comment here which describes these lines of code, which is to display back the data, and a comment here that just says to ask the user, are these details correct? So let's go line by line. So line 1 to 9 introduces the code as a sort of header. I've called it user details collection. The purpose is to collect and store some of the user details. The author is gcsecs. The date, I'm just going to change that to the 12th, and you don't need a license for that. And there are no modules imported, and if you don't know what module is, I'll do a video on that. Line 13 is another comment that just says, here is the data being collected. So in order to ask for the first name, I've set up a variable called first name, and I'm casting specifically for a string. And I'm using the input to allow the user to input commands through the keyboard, which is eventually, input data through the keyboard, which is eventually stored in the first name. On line 15 is exactly the same concept, a variable that's capturing data that's being entered via the input function. That data is stored, specifically casting as a string into the last name. Same concept for line 16. Line 17, same concept, except instead of a string, I'm looking for whole numbers to be entered as an integer. So an integer is a whole number. Line 18, same concept, except this time I'm asking for a float. I'm asking for the weight information, how heavy the person is, to be entered as a float. Line 19 is just putting a gap, white space, to break it up a bit to make it easier for the user to read. Line 21 is a comment that says, well, these next lines of code are displaying the data back. Line 22 is the print function that displays the string your first name is, and comma, and then whatever was in first name will be displayed. Line 23 to 26 is exactly the same, except it's going to display whatever was in last name, username, age, and weight. And then finally, line 29 displays the string, are these details correct? So let's run the code. Enter your first name. Let's go with Dave. Enter your last name, Smith. Enter your username, the great D. Smith. Fine. Enter your age, 11 years old. Enter your weight, let's see, I don't know how much an 11-year-old would weigh, 50.22 kilos. I have no idea, that sounds a bit heavy. Your first name is Dave. Your last name is Smith. Your username is the great D. Smith. Your first age, well, there's clearly a mistake there. Let's get rid of that. So I've fixed that. Your first weight, well, maybe it's tracking your weights, but I'm going to fix that for now, is 50.2. Are these details correct? And there we go. So this is showing how you cast for data. So these are the important bits, line 14 to 18. I'm casting for a string, casting for a string, casting for another string, this time casting for an integer, casting for a float. Okay, so there are different data types that you can cast for to be used later on in your program to do whatever it is that your program does. And that's it. That's data types.